The night market of New Avalon never truly slept. It breathed instead, in long exhalations of steam from noodle carts and the low hum of solar lanterns strung between crooked stalls, and Ethan Reyes had learned to walk through it the way a man walks through his own house in the dark, by memory, by feel, without needing to look at anything too closely. Which was probably why, after 11 years of coming here, he had never once noticed the stall at the end of Cartographer's Row. He noticed it tonight only because he was looking for a reason not to go home. The expedition had ended the way most of them ended lately, not in disaster, not in triumph, just in the quiet, grinding disappointment of finding nothing where the old satellite ghosts had promised something. 3 weeks in the Ashfall reaches, chasing a signal that turned out to be nothing but a collapsed relay tower singing to itself in the wind. His maps, the beautiful hand-inked charts he still insisted on making even though the Vulpine terrain drones could do it faster and cleaner, sat rolled and untouched in his pack. He hadn't even opened his kit since coming back through the checkpoint. He had been a cartographer for 11 years, ever since the Vulpine Accord opened the Ashfall reaches to joint survey teams, and someone in the New Avalon Cartography Guild had decided that a young man with steady hands and an old-fashioned insistence on ink over pixels might be useful for the kind of terrain the drones kept misreading. He had believed back then that mapping the unmapped world was a kind of quiet heroism. That somewhere out past the last charted ridge there was always one more true thing waiting to be found and named and folded into what people knew. 11 years had worn a great deal of that belief away. Lately it felt less like discovery and more like repetition. Walk out, find nothing, walk back, ink a blank space slightly less blank than it had been, and call that progress. He had no family waiting for him in the city. A mother 2 provinces east who called twice a year. A father who had died before the accord was even signed, no siblings, no partner he'd kept longer than a season. His apartment held a cot, a drafting table, and 11 years of unfinished maps stacked against one wall like a private, patient argument with himself about whether any of it had mattered. Home, most nights, was simply the place he went when the market finally closed and there was nowhere else left to be. Tonight he was in no hurry to get there. So he walked. And somewhere between the noodle carts and the fabric merchants, past the old woman who sold reconditioned engine parts and the Vulpine boy hawking fried lotus root, past a fortune stall where a bored young man read palms for pocket change and barely looked up as Ethan passed, he found himself standing in front of a stall no wider than a doorway, built of dark, unpolished wood that looked older than the market itself. There was no sign. No lantern, even though somehow the space around it was lit, softly, from within, by 100 small glass bottles arranged on shelves that climbed into shadow. Each bottle held what looked like a single point of light, no bigger than a grain of rice, suspended in the glass and pulsing very faintly, like something breathing in its sleep. Behind the stall sat a Vulpine woman he had never seen before, and he would have remembered her. Her fur was the color of banked embers, a deep, soft orange that caught the bottle light and held it, and her ears, tall, alert, tipped in a darker rust, swiveled toward him before her eyes even lifted from the ledger she was writing in. When she did look up, he found himself briefly unable to speak, because her eyes were the exact amber of the liquid in an old-world whiskey bottle, and they looked at him with an unsettling, ancient patience, as if she had been waiting for him specifically, and had expected him to be late. "You're staring," she said. Her voice was low, a little rough at the edges, like she didn't use it often. "Sorry. I've walked this row 100 times. I don't know how I missed this." "Most people do, until they need to find it." She set down her pen. "You look like a man who needs to find something." Ethan huffed something that wasn't quite a laugh. "I'm a cartographer. Finding things is supposed to be my whole deal. Lately it isn't going well." "Ah." She said it like the word explained everything, and somehow it did. "Then you're in luck. I don't sell maps. I sell the things maps can't find." He glanced past her at the shelves, at the 100 small stars trembling in their glass prisons. "What are they?" "Memories," she said simply, as if she were saying apples or cloth. Memories. The last ones. Gathered from the dying edge of the universe, where civilizations end. When a people disappear, truly disappear, not just die out but vanish from history, leaving no ruin and no record, what they were condenses. Compresses. Becomes light. She tapped one bottle with a single claw-tipped finger, and the star inside flickered like it recognized her touch. This is the last afternoon of a poet on a world called Seren. She was watching rain fall on red stone. That's all. That's the whole memory. But it's real, and it's the only proof that she, or her whole civilization, ever existed at all. Ethan looked at the little bottle, unimpressed and fascinated in equal measure. People actually buy these? 2. What? Relive someone else's rainy afternoon. Mostly they buy them for entertainment. Adventures. Love stories. Last stands? I don't stop them. Something moved behind her amber eyes, something tired. But that isn't what they are. What are they, then? She studied him for a long moment, longer than the question warranted, the way you'd study a stranger's face trying to decide if you could trust it. Buy one and find out, she said. Or don't. Most people who understand what these are stop wanting to buy them. It should have been a warning. Later, he would understand that it was exactly that, the clearest warning she could give him without simply telling him to walk away and never come back. But he was 3 weeks off a failed expedition, hollowed out and restless, and there is a particular kind of recklessness that lives in men who have just failed at the one thing they're good at. He reached into his coat for what little scrip he had left, and set it on the counter. That one, he said, pointing not at the poet's rain but at a smaller bottle near the edge of the shelf, one whose star burned a fierce, cold blue, brighter than the rest. He didn't know why he chose it. Something about the color felt like it was choosing him back. The Vulpine woman's ears flattened, just slightly. That one is expensive. In more ways than money. I don't have much of the first kind left. Try me on the second. She held his gaze a moment longer, then wrapped clawed fingers around the bottle and set it gently in his palm. It was warm. Warmer than glass should be. My name is Lyra, she said, as if it mattered that he know that before he opened it. Uncork it slowly. And Ethan. He blinked. I never told you my name. Something like sorrow passed over her face, there and gone. No, she agreed. You didn't. He didn't make it home before curiosity won. 2 streets from the market, under the broken orange glow of a street lamp that had been flickering since before the Vulpine Accord was signed, Ethan Reyes turned the little cork between his fingers and pulled it free. The world did not go dark. It went away. He was standing. No, he was a man named Cale, standing, on a hillside beneath a sky the color of a fresh bruise, violet shot through with 2 moons rising together like a held breath. Below him, a valley of silver grass rippled in wind that smelled of something like cinnamon, and something like rain. A small hand gripped his index finger, his daughter's hand, though he had never had a daughter, though this life belonged to no one he had ever been, and she was taking her first steps across the grass toward her mother, who knelt with her arms open and her face lit with a joy so complete it was almost unbearable to witness from the inside. Come on, little star, the mother was saying, in a language Ethan had never heard and somehow understood perfectly. Come to me. Come on. The child stumbled. Fell. Laughed instead of cried, the way children do before the world teaches them what falling means, and pushed herself back up on small hands, and kept walking, wobbling, arms out for balance, toward her mother's open arms, under a violet sky, on a world that. Ethan understood this the way you understand things in dreams, as fact without evidence, no longer existed. Had not existed for a very long time. This was the last afternoon it ever had. He felt Cale's heart in his own chest, hammering with a love so large it had no edges. He felt 40 years of a life he had never lived compress into this one unbearable, golden moment, every argument, every harvest, every grief and small triumph of an entire marriage and an entire fatherhood. All of it pouring toward this single afternoon like a river reaching the sea. He understood, in the space of a heartbeat that lasted less than a second in the real world, that this was the last thing Cale ever remembered before the silence took his world, and that he had chosen, with whatever strange mercy governs the universe's dying, to spend his very last conscious thought watching his daughter learn to walk. Then it was gone, and Ethan Reyes was on his knees on a New Avalon side street, gasping, an empty glass bottle rolling out of his hand and cracking against the cobblestones, and he was crying, openly, helplessly crying, for a daughter who was not his, for a wife he had never met, for a whole violet-skied world he had never once heard of before tonight. It took him almost 20 minutes to stand up. When he did, he didn't go home. He went back to the stall. Lyra was still there, as if she hadn't moved, as if she'd known exactly how long it would take. "Now you know," she said quietly, before he could speak, "why I never open them." Ethan sank onto the low stool across from her stall. She must have kept it there for exactly this purpose, for exactly this kind of customer, and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I have never felt anything so real in my life. Not my own memories. Not my actual childhood. It was more mine than my own life. Because it was distilled, Lyra said. A whole existence, reduced to the one moment that mattered most. Your own life is smeared across decades of forgotten mornings and grocery lists. His was refined down to a single perfect grief. Of course it felt larger. Grief always weighs more than it should. You knew what it would do to me. I knew approximately. I never know exactly. Every star is different. She was quiet a moment, turning her pen between clawed fingers. I told you not to buy that one. You told me it was expensive. I told you everything I'm permitted to tell a stranger on his first night. Something flickered behind her amber eyes. Permitted by whom, he wondered, but didn't ask. Not yet. Most customers buy the cheerful ones. Adventures. First kisses. A war won at the very last moment. They walk away smiling and come back for more, the way people do with anything that makes them feel something without costing them anything real. You went straight for the blue ones. Is that bad? The blue ones are always the last memory before the silence took the world entirely. They're the ones I keep separate. The ones I don't display where children can reach them. She looked at him properly then, assessing, the way she had the first time. You didn't pick it by accident. I don't know why I picked it, Ethan admitted. It just looked like it was already mine, somehow. That doesn't make sense. No, Lyra agreed softly. It doesn't. Not yet. He came back the next night. And the night after that. He told himself, the first few times, that he was only there for the stars, that grief, however borrowed, was still less painful than the particular grief of failing at your own small life, over and over, quietly, with no one there to console you for it. But by the second week he had stopped buying bottles altogether, and Lyra had stopped offering them, and they simply talked, about the Ashfall reaches and the maps he still insisted on inking by hand, about the strange loneliness of a job that required you to go looking for things that mostly weren't there, about the particular ache of watching your own species and hers coexist in a peace so uneasy it sometimes felt like held breath rather than trust. He learned, in pieces, the shape of her ordinary days. She opened the stall at dusk and closed it near dawn, sleeping through the daylight hours in a small room above a tea merchant's shop 3 streets over, because the stars, she said, seemed to prefer the dark, seemed almost to dim, faintly, under direct sun, as if even light this far from home was too loud for them. She had never taken a single night off in the 4 years since her mother died and left her the stall, not because anyone required it of her, but because she had never been able to shake the feeling that the moment she stopped watching over them, something essential would slip away unguarded. Ethan recognized the feeling. It was the same one that kept his own unfinished maps stacked against his wall instead of thrown out. The belief that abandoning an unfinished thing was its own kind of small betrayal. You work too hard at grieving other people's worlds, he told her, one night in the second week, watching her polish the same brass fitting on a lantern for the 3rd time without seeming to notice she was doing it. When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy, and not because it honored something already gone? Lyra considered the question so long he thought she might not answer it at all. I used to like to draw, she said finally. Before the stall. Just ordinary things, the market rooftops, the shape of steam off the noodle carts. I stopped when I inherited this place. It felt frivolous, making pictures of things that were still here to look at, when I had an entire universe of things that weren't. That's backward, Ethan said. The things that are still here to look at are the whole reason the stars matter at all. If nobody bothered to notice ordinary mornings while they still had them, there'd be nothing worth condensing into light once they were gone. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting behind her amber eyes. That is either the wisest thing anyone has said to me in 4 years, she said slowly, or the most convenient argument a man has ever made for why a woman should stop being so careful all the time. Can it be both? For the first time since he met her, she laughed, a short, surprised sound, quickly muffled, as though laughter were a language she hadn't practiced in a long time and wasn't sure she still remembered how to speak fluently. It was, Ethan thought later, the exact moment he stopped coming to the stall for the stars, or even for the company, and started coming simply because a single evening without hearing that sound again felt unaccountably poorer than it should have. She told him, slowly, in pieces, about the silence, an old, terrible phenomenon at the far edge of known space, where entire civilizations simply stopped. Not war. Not plague. Not any cause anyone had ever traced. 1 year a world's satellites blinked in orbit, and its cities hummed with light, and the next year there was nothing, no ruins, no wreckage, no bodies, no broadcasts fading into static. Just absence, total and clean, as though someone had reached into history itself and erased the page. No records survive, she said one night, turning a dim green bottle over in her palm without opening it. No architecture. No language samples. Whatever they were, in a single year they ceased entirely to have existed, except for these. She set the bottle down gently among its neighbors. The stars are the only proof any of them were ever real. And there are fewer of them every year. Fewer? You mean you're running out? Her ears drooped, just slightly, an expression he was starting to learn the way you learn a language, through repetition, through context, through the slow accumulation of small honest moments. I mean the silence is spreading faster than the stars can be gathered. Whoever gathers them, and I don't fully know who does, or how they reach me, is losing ground. Who does gather them? I don't know, Lyra said, and for the first time since he'd met her, he believed she genuinely didn't. I'd only know I inherited the stall, and the stars come to me, and I sell them, and I've never once seen who leaves the new ones on my shelf overnight. Ethan sat with that for a long moment, watching the little lights breathe in their glass. That's not creepy at all. You get used to it, Lyra said, and for the first time, she almost smiled. It was late in the 4th week, the market half empty, most of the stalls shuttered for the night, only the persistent glow of Lyra's shelves and one noodle cart still lit, when Ethan noticed the bottle sitting apart from all the others. It sat on its own small shelf near the back of the stall, half covered by a square of dark cloth, as though someone had tried and failed to fully hide it. The star inside was not blue, or gold, or the soft green of the poet's rainy afternoon. It was the pale, familiar white-yellow of an ordinary sun. Earth's color. Lyra! He picked it up before she could stop him, and she did try, her hand darting out a half-second too late, claws closing on empty air. This one's different. Put it down, Ethan! Something in her voice, a note he hadn't heard before, somewhere between fear and grief, made him look at her rather than the bottle. But it was too late. He had already seen what was etched, almost invisibly, into the glass at its base, a set of coordinates he recognized immediately, because he had spent 11 years drawing maps of exactly that stretch of the world. New Avalon. His own city. This is Earth, he said slowly. This is here. Put it down. When is it from? These stars are supposed to be from dead civilizations. Earth isn't. He stopped. Because now that he was holding it, now that his thumb rested against the cork, he could feel something no other bottle had ever given off before it was even opened, a kind of pull, faint but unmistakable, like standing too near the edge of a very tall building. Lyra, this doesn't feel like the others. This feels like it's not finished yet. It isn't, she said, very quietly, and the fear in her voice finally reached all the way through him. That bottle isn't a memory of something that died 50,000 years ago on the far edge of the galaxy. It's a memory of something that hasn't happened yet. It's 50 years from now. It's your future, Ethan, Earth's future, and I have refused to sell it, or open it, or even look at it too closely, for longer than you have been alive. He set it down very slowly, as if it might go off. Show me anyway, he said. No. Lyra. No. Her voice cracked on the word, and her ears were flat against her skull, and for the first time he saw not the ancient, patient merchant who had been waiting for him from the very first night, but something closer to a frightened young woman who had been carrying an unbearable weight for a very long time and had just discovered someone else might finally see it. You don't understand what these stars are, not yet. I've watched people relive a rainy afternoon and weep for a week. This isn't a rainy afternoon. This is the end of your entire world, and I have spent years believing that if it is never opened, it can never fully become true. Do you understand? I think these aren't just recordings. I think they're warnings. And I think the act of opening one begins pulling reality toward whatever it shows. Ethan looked at the small, sun-colored star, trembling faintly behind glass, coordinates for his own city etched invisibly into its base. Then why do you still have it? He asked quietly. Instead of destroying it? Lyra didn't answer for a long moment. When she finally did, her voice was smaller than he had ever heard it. Because I'm afraid that if I destroy it, I destroy the only chance anyone ever has of stopping it from coming true instead. The men came 3 nights later, and Ethan almost didn't notice them, because they didn't look like anything worth noticing. 3 humans and a Vulpine in plain gray coats, moving through the market with the unhurried, watchful gait of people who had done this kind of work many times before and were in no particular rush to be seen doing it now. He noticed them because Lyra noticed them first. He watched her go very still behind the counter, ears swiveling, nostrils flaring once, and then she was moving. Sweeping bottles off the shelves and into a canvas satchel with a speed that told him this was not the first time she'd had to do this. Only perhaps the first time she'd had to do it with an audience. Ethan. Take the satchel. Walk, don't run, toward the fabric row and wait for me by the blue awning. Who are they? Collectors. Buyers who don't want to purchase memories, they want to possess the source of them. They've been circling closer for months. I don't know how they found this stall, but they have, and they are not going to ask politely. She shoved the last bottle, the sun-colored one, the earth bottle, wrapped now in dark cloth, into his hands specifically, separate from the rest. Keep this one on your body. Not in the bag. If they take the bag, they cannot have this one. Lyra, what happens if they get it? Her amber eyes found his, steady despite the tremor he could feel in her hands as she pressed the wrapped bottle into his coat. I don't know what happens if it's opened by someone who wants the future it shows to happen instead of someone trying to stop it, she said. And I would very much like to never find out. They didn't wait for the blue awning. 2 of the gray-coated men had already begun angling toward the stall with the specific, unhurried confidence of men who believed they had already won, and Lyra grabbed Ethan's wrist and pulled him into the press of the crowd, ducking between a noodle cart and a stack of woven baskets, out through a gap in the market's outer stalls that he, 11 years a cartographer of this exact city, had never once noticed existed. They ran. They didn't stop running, not really, for 3 days. They took the old maintenance tunnels beneath New Avalon first, the ones Ethan had mapped himself as a younger man and had genuinely believed no one else remembered existed, emerging at dawn into the foothills above the city where the terraformed farmland gave way to old, unrepaired wilderness. From there they climbed, actually climbed, hand over hand in places, into the Kestrel Range, where the abandoned observatory towers of the old pre-Accord scientific outpost still stood like broken teeth against the sky. The second day nearly ended them both. They had come down out of the high passes into a river gorge Ethan's old surveys marked simply as unnamed, seasonal, impassable in flood. A note he had written himself, years ago, without ever imagining he would one day need to cross it anyway, running from men in gray coats with a bottled future strapped against his chest. The water was higher than his notes promised, brown and fast with mountain runoff, and the only crossing was a rope bridge so old that half its slats had rotted through to nothing. "We go one at a time," Lyra said, testing the first plank with her weight, ears pinned flat against the roar of the water below. "If it fails under one of us, the other still has the bottle. That's not a plan, that's a eulogy with extra steps. It's the only plan we have time for." She was already 3 slats out, moving with a careful, deliberate balance that made him understand, for the first time, how much of her life had been spent moving quietly through places that weren't built for comfort. He followed when she reached the far bank, testing each board before trusting it, the canvas satchel of ordinary stars swinging at his hip and the wrapped earth bottle held tight against his ribs with one forearm the entire way across. He was perhaps 4 boards from solid ground when the plank beneath his back foot gave way entirely, dropping into the brown water below with a crack he felt in his teeth, and only Lyra's hand closing hard around his wrist kept him from following it down. She hauled him the last few feet onto the bank with a strength that startled him, and they lay there a moment, soaked and shaking, listening to the river swallow the broken plank whole. "You could have let go," Ethan said, once he could speak again. "Kept the satchel dry. Made the smarter trade." "I did make the smarter trade," Lyra said, still catching her breath. "I traded a dry satchel for you. I'd make it again." Neither of them said anything else about it, but something had shifted in the crossing, some remaining distance between travelers thrown together by necessity, and 2 people who had just decided, without discussing it, that they would rather risk everything together than keep either one of them safe alone. They reached the Kestrel Range proper by nightfall, where the abandoned observatory towers of the old pre-Accord scientific outpost still stood like broken teeth against the sky. It was in the 3rd observatory, a crumbling dome with half its roof caved in and starlight pouring through the gap like it had been designed that way, that Lyra finally told him the rest of it, not because she wanted to, he understood, but because exhaustion and fear had worn through whatever caution she'd been rationing out to him one careful piece at a time. "There's an order to who's supposed to know about the stars," she said, wrapped in a thin blanket against the mountain cold, watching real stars wheel overhead through the broken dome. "Vulpine sanctuaries have kept this secret for 3 generations. We were never supposed to sell them to entertain humans. That was never the intent." "Then why do you?" "Because my mother did, and her mother before her, and somewhere along the way the purpose got diluted. Forgotten, maybe. Or maybe it was never forgotten, just hidden behind a good business, because a stall that openly claimed to sell warnings from a dying universe would draw exactly the kind of attention we're currently running from." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I inherited a shop and half a truth. I've spent my whole life trying to work out the other half. And the collectors? What do they actually want? I think," Lyra said slowly, "they believe what I fear. That opening a bottle pulls reality toward what it shows. If that's true, then whoever controls the earth bottle controls which future comes true. Not through malice, necessarily. Some of them might believe they're doing something merciful, choosing the least terrible version of what's coming. Others..." She stopped. "Others? Others might simply want to sell that kind of power to whoever will pay the most for it." Her ears lay flat. "Either way, I would rather they never have it." Ethan was quiet a long moment, watching her in the starlight, this woman who had carried an impossible inheritance alone for years and had only just, 4 weeks ago, let a stranger see the weight of it. "You're not alone in this anymore," he said. "For whatever that's worth." Something in her amber eyes softened, just slightly, in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "It's worth more than you think, cartographer." They kept moving. Across the Kestrel Range and down into the rust belt of the old orbital infrastructure, past the abandoned space elevator at Threnody Station, a half-collapsed spire of composite and cable that had once carried cargo to the ring stations before the Silence took the ring station's primary trading partner, and half the economic reason for the elevator's existence went with it. They sheltered there for a night, in the base structure's old crew quarters, and it was there, surrounded by peeling murals of a hopeful future that had partially failed to arrive, that the relationship between them tipped fully from curiosity into something neither of them could keep pretending was only friendship. It happened in a small, unremarkable way, the way most real things do. Ethan was tending a fire built from scavenged crate wood, and Lyra was mapping their route for the next leg of the journey with a stick in the dust of the old crew quarters floor, and she looked up to ask him something about the terrain and simply stopped, watching him in the firelight. And he looked back at her, amber eyes and orange fur gone gold at the edges from the flames, and neither of them said anything for a long moment because there was, for once, nothing that needed explaining. "You've been kind to me," Lyra said eventually, "in a way I didn't expect from a customer who bought the most dangerous bottle on my shelf on his very first night." "I've been terrified for you," Ethan said, "in a way I didn't expect to feel about a woman I met a month ago while looking for a distraction from my own failures." "Is that what I am? A distraction?" "You were, for about one night." He looked at her steadily. "You stopped being that a long time ago." She was quiet, turning the stick over in her clawed hands. "I've spent my whole life protecting the last pieces of civilizations that no longer exist. I've never let myself want anything that wasn't already gone, Ethan. It felt safer that way. You can't lose what you never let yourself hope for. And now? No," Lyra said softly. "I think I'd rather risk losing something real than keep being safe with nothing at all." He crossed the small distance between them and she didn't pull away, and when he kissed her, gently, uncertainly, she kissed him back with something that felt less like uncertainty and more like relief, like she had been holding her breath for a very long time and had finally been given permission to let it go. The hidden Vulpine sanctuary, when they finally reached it 2 days later through a passage disguised as an old mining shaft, was nothing like Ethan had imagined. He had pictured vaguely something like a temple, grand, hushed, reverent. Instead he found what looked more like an old library crossed with a greenhouse, warm and green gold with hanging lanterns, dozens of Vulpine elders moving quietly between shelves of preserved texts and, he realized with a jolt, hundreds more bottled stars, entire walls of them, glowing gently in the dark like a captured galaxy. Lyra had gone very quiet somewhere in the last stretch of tunnel, and Ethan understood why the moment they stepped into the light. This was not merely a hidden refuge to her. Faded portraits lined one long wall near the entrance, generations of Vulpine keepers rendered in careful ink, and she stopped in front of one without seeming to mean to, a younger woman with the same banked amber fur, the same tired amber eyes, holding a bottle of her own in both hands. "My mother," Lyra said quietly, before Ethan could ask. "She brought me here exactly once, when I was young enough that I remember it more as a feeling than a place. She never explained what it was. She only told me that someday I would understand why she never let herself rest, and that I should try to forgive her for it in advance, because she doubted she'd have time to explain it properly before she was gone." Her claws traced the edge of the portrait's frame without quite touching it. "She died 4 years ago, still trying to protect a secret she never lived long enough to fully understand herself. I inherited the stall the same week I buried her. I don't think I've stopped running since, one way or another, even standing perfectly still behind that counter every night." An elder named Rook, ancient even by Vulpine standards, foregone the color of old ash, met them at the entrance and studied Ethan for a long, uncomfortable moment before addressing Lyra directly. "You've brought a human into the last sanctuary," Rook said. It wasn't quite an accusation. I brought the human who's currently the only person besides me trying to keep the Earth star from being opened by people who want to weaponize it," Lyra said. "I think that earns him a seat at the table." Rook's eyes moved to Ethan, then to the wrapped bottle he still carried, tucked close against his chest the way Lyra had told him to keep it. "May I see it?" Ethan glanced at Lyra. She nodded once. He unwrapped the bottle carefully. In the dim gold light of the sanctuary, the pale sun-colored star seemed almost to pulse in time with something. His own heartbeat, he realized, or close enough that the coincidence unsettled him. Rook studied it for a long time without touching it. "You believe opening it pulls reality toward what it shows?" the elder said finally to Lyra. "I believe it might. You're not wrong to fear that. But you're not entirely right either." Rook's ancient eyes lifted to both of them. "There is a truth about the stars that has been kept even from most of our own sanctuary keepers, passed down only to those who inherit a stall directly. I think it's time you both heard it, because I believe you are the first people in 3 generations who might actually need it." They sat in a small alcove of the sanctuary, surrounded by the soft glow of 1,000 captured lights, and Rook told them a story that unmade everything Lyra had believed about her own inheritance. "You believe the stars are gathered," Rook said. "Harvested, like grain, from worlds already dead. That is what every sanctuary keeper has believed for 3 generations, because that is what we were told, and none of us ever questioned it, because the grief of it seemed proof enough of its truth." The old Vulpine's voice was steady, but something in it trembled at the edges. "It is not true. Not entirely." "Then what are they?" Lyra asked, and Ethan could hear, beneath the question, the sound of a lifetime's certainty beginning to crack. "They are not harvested. They are given." Rook gestured to the walls of glowing bottles around them. "Every star in this sanctuary, and every star that has ever passed through your stall, was created, deliberately, painstakingly, at unimaginable cost, by the last survivors of a dying world, in the final hours before the silence took them. Not as a passive recording accidentally condensed from their final moments. As a choice. An act of will. They gathered everything they had ever been, every joy, every grief, every ordinary golden afternoon, and pressed it, by some method none of us have ever fully understood, into a single point of light small enough to survive what was coming for them. And then they sent it outward. Into the dark. Hoping someone, someday, somewhere, would find it and remember that they had lived. Ethan felt something in his chest go very still. "That's not a warning," he said slowly. "That's not even a memory in the way we've been thinking about it." "No," Rook agreed. "Every bottle you have ever sold, Lyra, is not a fragment of grief. It is an act of hope. The last, most defiant thing a dying people can do, refuse to be forgotten. Refuse to let their existence end in silence. They chose, at the very end, not to disappear quietly, but to shout. As loudly and as beautifully as they were able, we were here. We loved. We mattered." Lyra's eyes had filled, and she made no effort to hide it. "Then the Earth star is different," Rook said gently now. "Because Earth has not yet fallen to the silence. That star was not made by survivors looking backward at a life already lived. It was made, or is being made, even now, in a future 50 years from this moment. By someone looking forward, trying to warn the past of what's coming, in the hope that the past might yet change it." The old elder's ash-colored eyes moved to Ethan. "And I believe, cartographer, that the man in that memory who looks exactly like you is not a coincidence, and not a prophecy carved in stone. I believe he is a question. Being asked of you, directly, across 50 years of time, will you let this happen, or will you become the reason it doesn't?" They stayed 3 days in the sanctuary, and on the 2nd day, the collectors found them. Not through force. The sanctuary's hidden entrance held against a direct assault, at least for now, but through negotiation. The gray-coated Vulpine woman who led them, introduced only as Cyril, came alone and unarmed to the mining shaft entrance and asked, with unsettling politeness, for a conversation. "We don't want to hurt anyone," Cyril said, standing in the tunnel's mouth with her empty hands visible. We want the Earth Star, and we're prepared to pay any price the sanctuary names for it. Why? Ethan asked, before Lyra or Rook could answer. What do you actually want to do with it? Cyril's expression, for the first time, showed something like genuine grief rather than mere calculation. My employer lost an entire family to a plague outbreak in the Southern Territories, 11 years ago. Preventable. A single early warning could have saved them, could have saved thousands. When we learned what these stars might be capable of, we didn't see a weapon. We saw the single most important early warning system ever created. Open the Earth Star. See exactly what's coming in 50 years. Prevent it, the way you'd prevent any other tragedy you saw coming in time. Lyra believes opening it might make the future it shows more likely, not less. Ethan said. Not prevent it. Cause it. Then we disagree on the mechanism, Cyril said simply. But not on the stakes. Which is exactly why this shouldn't be decided by one grieving shopkeeper hoarding it in secret for years out of fear. It should be studied. Understood. Used deliberately, by people with the resources to act on what it shows, rather than left to gather dust because one woman is too frightened to look at it. It was, Ethan realized with a chill, not an unreasonable argument. That was what made it dangerous. Lyra stepped forward before he could respond. I'm not refusing out of hoarding, or fear alone, she said. I'm refusing because I don't know which of us is right about what opening it does, and neither do you. If I'm right, and it pulls reality toward the future it shows, then opening it in the hands of someone determined to act on a specific vision of that future is the single most dangerous thing anyone could do with it. You don't get to gamble with an entire species' future because your reasoning sounds sensible standing in a tunnel. Cyril's jaw tightened. Then what would satisfy you? Another 3 generations of it sitting dark on a shelf while the silence spreads faster every year? Perhaps either of us gets to be the one who decides that alone, Rook said, stepping forward from the shadow of the tunnel mouth, ash-colored eyes steady on the collector. You've built your entire argument, Cyril, on the belief that certainty is a kind of mercy. That if you simply act quickly enough, decisively enough, on what the vision shows, you spare people the slower grief of discovering it too late. I understand the shape of that belief. I have watched it consume better people than you, in worse causes. With respect, Elder, you've spent 3 generations not acting, and the silence has spread the entire time regardless. Cyril said. I don't see the virtue in your patience. I see paralysis dressed up as wisdom. Perhaps, Rook allowed. Or perhaps patience and paralysis only look alike from the outside, to someone who has never had to sit with an answer this heavy long enough to be sure they weren't about to break something irreplaceable in their hurry to fix it. Cyril looked, for just a moment, less like a hunter and more like a woman who had buried someone and never quite finished being angry about it. My employer's family didn't have 3 generations to wait for someone else's patience, she said, quieter now. They had 1 outbreak, and 11 years, and no warning at all. I'm sorry for that, Lyra said, and meant it. I am. But grief doesn't make you right about what to do with a piece of the future you don't yet understand. It only makes you certain. Those aren't the same thing, and I think some part of you already knows it, or you wouldn't still be standing here arguing instead of simply taking it from us by force. Nobody had an easy answer for that either. Cyril said nothing more, but she did not leave, and for the first time since the gray coats had first appeared at the edge of the night market, Ethan let himself believe that this might end in something other than violence. That night, in the small alcove where Rook had told them the truth of the stars, Ethan sat with the earth bottle in his hands and finally asked Lyra the question he'd been circling for days. What do you actually believe happens if I open it? Lyra was quiet for a long time. I believe, she said finally, that if it's opened by someone who has already decided what future they want to force into being, the way Cyril's employer has, then yes, I think it pulls reality toward that specific, narrow vision, the way a lens focuses light into a single burning point. That's what terrifies me about Cyril's argument. Not that she's malicious. That she's certain. And if it's opened by someone who isn't certain of anything? Who just wants to see, and doesn't already know what he'd force it to become. Her amber eyes found his. Then I hope, it isn't a lens at all. I think it's a mirror. I think it shows you honestly what's coming if nothing changes, without demanding that you make it come true. And I think what you do with that honesty is entirely up to you. She reached out and closed his hands more firmly around the bottle. Rook told us the stars are acts of hope, not warnings of despair. Maybe the Earth star is the same. Maybe it isn't asking you to prevent a fixed future. Maybe it's asking you to notice, in time, that the future isn't fixed at all. That's a lot of maybes to bet an entire species on. It is, Lyra agreed softly. But I would rather bet on hope with you than certainty with Cyril. Ethan looked down at the small, patient light behind the glass. His own city's coordinates etched invisibly at its base, a version of himself walking alone under a sky with no satellites, 50 years from this exact moment, and made his decision. Then let's find out together, he said. Not running from Cyril. Not hiding in a mountain. Together, in front of everyone who's chasing it, so there's no room left for anyone to claim they control what it shows. They met Cyril and her 3 gray-coated companions at dawn, in the ruined observatory dome where the third night of their flight had first tipped something between Ethan and Lyra into love. Rook came with them, and 2 other sanctuary elders, standing as witnesses rather than combatants. No one carried a weapon. It was, Ethan thought, the strangest possible setting for what might be the most consequential decision either species would make in his lifetime. A broken dome full of real stars overhead, and one bottled star about to be opened beneath them. You're going to open it, Cyril said. It wasn't quite a question. I am, Ethan said. But not for you, and not for whatever future your employer has already decided it wants to see. I'm opening it for myself, and for Lyra, without deciding in advance what I want it to become. Cyril's expression flickered, surprise, maybe, or something closer to reluctant respect. And if it shows you exactly the collapse you're afraid of? City's gone. Light's gone. That man walking alone under an empty sky. Then I'll know what I'm trying to prevent, Ethan said. Which is more than any of us know standing here right now. He looked at Lyra. She nodded once, and took his free hand in both of hers. Whatever it shows you, she said, quiet enough that only he could hear it. Come back to me after. That's all I'm asking. Not a particular future. Just that one. I will, Ethan said, and found he believed it completely, in a way he had believed very little else in his entire life. Whatever's on the other side of this, I'm walking back out of it toward you. Rook watched them both with something unreadable in those ancient ash-colored eyes, and the 2 other elders bowed their heads slightly, not in ceremony exactly, but in the manner of people bearing witness to something they understood to be important even if they couldn't yet say why. Cyril had gone very still, her 3 companions behind her equally silent, and for one suspended moment the entire broken dome held its breath along with the real stars wheeling overhead through the shattered roof. Then Ethan uncorked the Earth star. He was standing on an empty highway, 50 years from this exact dawn, and he was himself, genuinely himself, not borrowing another man's grief the way he had with Kale's blue star, but seeing directly, impossibly, through his own future eyes. The cities of New Avalon rose in the distance, dark and slowly being reclaimed by forest, exactly as the memory had first shown him weeks ago. No satellites threaded the sky. No lights burned in any window he could see. But something was different. There was a second set of footprints beside his own in the dust of the road. Small, clawed, unmistakably Vulpine. He was not alone in this future. He had never been alone in it. Not once, not for 50 years, and as the vision widened, gently, generously, the way a held breath finally releases, he saw why the city stood empty. Not because civilization had ended in catastrophe, but because it had changed. Deliberately. Slowly. Humans and Vulpines had chosen, somewhere in the 50 years between this dawn and that one, to stop building glittering cities that swallowed the wilderness, and had instead spread outward into smaller, quieter settlements woven into the land rather than paved over it. The satellites were gone because they were no longer needed. The two species had built something better, something that didn't require watching each other from orbit to trust each other on the ground. The man in the vision. The older Ethan, walking that empty highway, was not the last survivor of a fallen civilization. He was simply walking home. To someone waiting for him. And when Ethan in the vision looked up from the road, just for a moment, toward whatever was watching him across 50 years of time, his face held no despair at all. It held peace. Ethan came back to himself on his knees in the observatory dome, exactly as he had after the blue star's memory, except this time there were no tears of grief waiting for him, only Lyra's hands still wrapped around his, and Rook's ancient eyes watching him with something like cautious hope, and Cyril standing very still, waiting. "Well?" Cyril asked, and for the first time her certainty had a crack in it. "It's not fixed," Ethan said slowly, still catching his breath. "The empty cities, the abandoned highways, none of that is a catastrophe. It's a choice. A future where we stop building cities that push nature and Vulpine sanctuaries out to the margins, and built something that made room for both instead." He looked at Lyra. "I wasn't alone in it. Not for one single day of those 50 years. Something in Lyra's amber eyes broke open, gently, like the sun clearing cloud. "Then Rook was right," she whispered. "It's not a warning of doom. It's a question. And I think," Ethan said, looking now at Cyril, "that the answer isn't something one bottle can decide for an entire species. It's something we build, every day, in 1,000 small choices, starting with whether we treat each other like threats to be managed or like people worth making room for." He held up the now empty bottle, its light gone, its glass simply glass. "Your employer wanted a lens to force a single outcome into being. What I found instead was a mirror showing that the outcome was never fixed at all. It's still being written, right now, by people like you and me deciding, every single day, what kind of neighbors we're going to be to each other." Cyril was silent for a long moment, looking at the empty bottle, and then, unexpectedly, at Lyra. "You were right to protect it," she said finally. "I was so certain I already knew what it would show that I nearly took the choice away from everyone else before they'd even had the chance to see it for themselves." She stepped back, gray coat settling around her like something releasing its grip. "I'll tell my employer there's nothing left to fight over. I don't imagine he'll be pleased. But I find I'm no longer willing to force a single vision of the future onto anyone, on his behalf or otherwise." She left without another word, and her 3 companions followed, and the observatory dome, for the first time in weeks, held nothing more dangerous than starlight. They stayed at the sanctuary another week, resting, and Rook offered Lyra something she had never once been offered in her entire life, running the stall alone. The chance to lay down the inheritance entirely, if she wanted to. To let the sanctuary keepers take custody of the remaining stars. To stop being the sole guardian of a secret that had worn her down to almost nothing before Ethan had ever wandered into her stall. "You don't have to spend your whole life protecting the past," Ethan told her, the night before they finally started back toward New Avalon. "Not alone, and not forever. You said it yourself, that first week. Every star is proof someone truly lived. But you're allowed to be someone who's living too, not just someone standing guard over everyone else who already has." Lyra was quiet a long while, watching the sanctuary's soft gold light settle over the walls of bottled stars. "I've spent so long believing my only value was in what I preserved," she said finally, "that I never let myself imagine what it would feel like to simply be something, instead of guarding something. You taught me that, without ever meaning to. The first time you cried over a stranger's memory of his daughter, and came back to my stall instead of walking away from what it cost you, I think that was the moment I started hoping I might get to have a life of my own too. And every memory," Ethan said quietly, echoing something she told him weeks ago in the firelight of Threnody Station, "even the painful ones, is proof that someone truly lived. Even the ones we haven't made yet." Lyra said, and kissed him, gently, in the golden light of 1,000 small stars that had all, once, been somebody's whole life. Before they left, Rook found them at the sanctuary's entrance, holding something small wrapped in dark cloth, not a star, but an ordinary, empty glass bottle, hand-blown and unremarkable, the twin of 100 others waiting to be filled. "Take this," the old elder said, pressing it into Lyra's hands. "Not as an heirloom. As a beginning. Your mother spent her whole life gathering endings. I think it's time someone in your family finally gathered a beginning instead, and saw what grew out of it." Rook's ash-colored eyes moved between them, something almost fond in the ancient patience there. "The silence will keep spreading, cartographer, starkeeper, whatever the two of you decide to call yourselves from here forward. We will keep doing what we can to slow it, here, with people better suited to the weight of it than two young people who have already given more than anyone should reasonably ask. Go home. Build something. Let the sanctuary carry what it was always meant to carry." Lyra held the empty bottle a long moment, turning it in the sanctuary's soft gold light, and for the first time in the weeks Ethan had known her, she looked less like a woman guarding a grief and more like a woman standing at the very beginning of something she hadn't yet decided the shape of. "Thank you," she told Rook. "For a truth I didn't know I needed until you gave it to me." "Thank the cartographer," Rook said, glancing at Ethan with something that might, on a less ancient face, have been called a smile. "He's the one who wandered into your stall and refused to leave until you let yourself be seen. That takes a particular kind of stubbornness. I suspect you'll need quite a lot of it, in whatever you build next." They left the mountain the next morning, descending together through country neither of them had ever walked as anything other than fugitives, and found, somewhere in the slow days of the journey back toward New Avalon, that fear had quietly given way to something gentler, the unhurried, ordinary companionship of two people who no longer needed to run from anything, and had simply chosen, freely now, to keep walking beside each other anyway. Years later. Not 50, not yet, but enough that the memory of that dawn in the observatory dome had softened into something closer to legend than event. The old stall at the end of Cartographer's Row still stood in the New Avalon night market, unpolished but a little more weathered, its shelves still lit from within. But the shelves no longer held bottled memories of dead civilizations. Lyra had given the last of the true stars over to Rook's sanctuary, to be studied properly, tended by people who understood at last what they truly were, and what they deserved: reverence, not commerce, care rather than curiosity dressed up as customers. What remained on her shelves now were empty glass bottles, hand-blown, ordinary, waiting. Above them hung a small handwritten sign, in Ethan's careful cartographer's script: "Go make a memory worth preserving." It had become, in its quiet way, one of the market's small local wonders, not because anyone believed the empty bottles held any magic of their own, but because people had noticed, over the years, that something strange and lovely happened to the ones who bought them anyway. A young couple who purchased 2 bottles the night before a long separation, and returned a year later to find both had begun, faintly, to glow. An old man who bought one for his granddaughter's naming day and swore, months later, that it pulsed warmer every time she laughed. No one could explain it, least of all Lyra, who only ever smiled the particular soft smile of someone who understood a secret, and had decided the secret didn't need explaining to still be true. It was near closing, on an ordinary autumn evening, when the last customer of the night approached the stall. A young Vulpine woman, uncertain, turning an empty bottle over in her hands the way Ethan once had, weeks before he'd known what any of it would cost him, or give him in return. "What does it do?" she asked. Lyra, gray now at her temples, ears still sharp, still amber-eyed, glanced at Ethan where he stood beside her mapping out tomorrow's supply route the way he mapped 1,000 things before, and the two of them shared a look that held an entire 50 years of choosing each other, one ordinary day at a time. "Nothing on its own," Lyra told the young woman. "It's just glass. Whatever it holds, you'll have to go out and live first." The young woman looked uncertain, then determined, and finally, simply hopeful, and walked off into the last light of the market with the empty bottle held carefully in both hands. Behind her, deep inside the glass, so faint it might almost have been imagined, a tiny star had already begun to glow.